Hello, welcome back to your favorite news channel where we answer your questions. I am Leslie Mendoza. Here with me is
Malika Oxendine. Today we have a very interesting topic that a lot of our supporters have asked us to discuss, which is Brexit. But first we need to explain the EU.
The European Union, often known as the EU, is an economic and political partnership involving 28 European countries. It began after World War II to foster economic cooperation with the idea that countries which trade together were more likely to avoid going to war with each other.
It has since grown to become a single market, allowing goods and people to move around, basically as if the member states were one country. It has its own currency, the euro, which is used by 19 of the member countries, its own parliament, and it now sets rules in a wide range of areas, including on the environment, transportation, consumer rights, and even things such as mobile phone charges.
One common question we have received from you guys is, why is Brexit dividing Britain and what is the impact of the rest of the world? Both Britain and the EU agreed early Thursday to extend the deadline for Brexit to Halloween. Brexit refers to the withdrawal of the UK from the EU following a referendum vote by the British people on June 23, 2016.
It is a word that is used as a shorthand way of saying the UK leaving the EU, merging the words Britain and exit to get Brexit. Almost 52% of the country voted to leave the EU, triggering a 2-year process in accordance with Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union. According to this agreement, Britain was to begin the process of leaving the EU on March 29, 2019. But just 3 days before, the British Parliament voted for a third time to reject Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal, pushing Brexit down the road.
Those hope for withdrawal include Eurosceptics or Brexiteers from both the left and the right, pro-Europeanist, also from the left and the right of the political spectrum, would like to remain in the EU. Another question you guys had was, what are the potential effects if Prime Minister Theresa May fails to strike a deal with Parliament?
Prime Minister May lost by a smaller margin than before and will continue to push Parliament to approve the UK to divorce from the EU Parliament. Leaders are divided over the Prime Minister's decision. May is also receiving pressure from pro-Brexit demonstrators who say that the UK should have left already.
The deal is legally binding text that sets the terms of the UK's divorce from the EU. It covers how much money the UK owes the EU and what happens to the UK citizens living elsewhere in the EU and EU citizens living in the UK. It also proposes a method of avoiding the return of a physical Northern Ireland border. The vote means that Britain is moving closer to a withdrawal on April 12 without an agreement, the no deal scenario that many economists and officials have warned would do serious economic damage. The only alternative may be a long delay, a move opposed by Brexit lawmakers.
So what are the advantages and disadvantages of a hard Brexit versus a softer Brexit?
A soft Brexit is usually taken to refer to one that keeps Britain closely aligned with the EU. The objective is to minimize the disruption to trade, to supply chains, and to business in general that would be created by diverging from the EU's regulations and standards, thereby reducing the cost of Brexit. In practice, a soft Brexit means staying within both the EU single market like Norway and its customs union like Turkey. Soft Brexiteers are willing to be bound by the EU rules and tariffs even though Britain will lose any say in making them. They also accept the inevitable consequence that it will be hard, even impossible, for Britain to do any trade deals with third countries. The harder Brexit option is understood to be a withdrawal in which Britain would give up participation in the EU single market and its legal rules. It would also resume full control over its own immigration system, introducing stricter controls on immigration from the EU and elsewhere. The harder option would require Britain to carry out trade with Europe and other nations under World Trade Organization (WTO) rules. So at one extreme, hard Brexit could involve the UK refusing to compromise on issues like the free movement of people, even if it meant leaving the single market or having to give up hopes of aspects of free trade agreements. At the other end of the scale, a soft Brexit might follow a similar path to Norway, which is a member of the single market and has to accept free movement of people as a result of that. So what does Brexit mean for trade relations with the US?
The United States and Europe have an on and off again relationship with the creation of a free trade zone between the two entities. If Britain separates itself from the EU, then it would lose the benefits of this trade agreement. Although they could set up their own agreements, Britain wouldn't have the same support as if they would if they were with the EU. In addition, the World Trade Organization sets rules for countries that don't have free trade deals with each other, including tariffs, the taxes charged on imports of goods. So without an agreement on trade, the UK would trade with the EU under the World Trade Organization.
The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, currently under a negotiation between the EU and the United States, would create the biggest free trade area the world has ever seen. They believed it could make American imports cheaper and boost British exports to the US. This debate now appears academic as US President Donald Trump is not a fan of the agreement, which means it has been shelved in its previous form. But whatever happens, when the UK quits the EU, it will no longer be a part of a revived TTIP and is planning to negotiate its own trade deals with the US. In conclusion, what are the pros and cons of Brexit?
Due to the fact that the EU is not for Brexit, or in other words, the UK leaving, there is not really as much pros for the EU, but as far as the UK, that's a different story. The pros of Brexit would be control. Britain would get the control of its borders and make their own rules of migration along with other things. That's what's basically what they want. Job growth. If trading increases after the separation, then there's a chance that employment will increase. Savings. With Britain no longer following the EU policies, about more than €1 billion would go to foreign farmers, and with Britain leaving the EU, they would be able to do what they want with their money. Cons of Brexit. Trade. The EU is a single market, so if Brexit were to happen, it would affect the benefit of free trade and lower negotiation with the rest of the world. Trade part 2. If the UK ends up doing well and has a deal on free trade with the EU, then other countries are going to feel like they can leave whenever they do not agree with every decision that happens that they are not in favor with. Lastly, Brexit could force Brits living in the EU member states to move back home, which would then lower the population in the EU, affecting the EU negatively. Brexit could cause Britain to lose the US as a primary trading partner. The United States and Europe have an on and off again relationship with Britain, so leaving it would then affect the arrangement the US has with the EU.
Now the real question, what's our opinion? We believe that Brexit will cause too many problems, therefore we are not for it. It would most likely damage the economy, cause conflict between both the EU and Britain, so we think Brexit should not occur. In a story like Brexit, why is it particularly important to get your news from multiple outlets?
Well, we have to remember that it's important to get news from multiple outlets on sources due to the fact that you always need to see both sides of the story and make sure that you're aware of the main points. So to conclude, thanks for tuning in with
Leslie
and Malika, and together we remind you to stay curious and informed.
Bye.